So we're going to go a little more depth into chipping today. Key things that I think have to be done to make us all chip properly. Chipping is, I'm going to say, relatively simple. Now, I'm able to do it and I'm relatively good at it. So therefore, I'm going to say it's fairly easy. But because there's no real force involved, it requires more technique, I think, than it does timing and force and motion, which makes it a lot easier to do. Okay, so the first question I get asked a lot is, what club should I use when I chip? Well, as we know, we've got a whole bag of clubs here. I'm going to say to you, I'm going to use my lob wedge or my most lofted club all the time. Now, there's a reason for that. One, I want to become good with one club. Two, I'm able to use that club anywhere around the green. The most lofted club means I can chip over bunkers, out of rough, off down slopes, off up slopes or whatever, and also off perfect lies. If I become good with one club, I then know how that club's going to react on greens from different situations. Now, that's not to say that I don't chip and run balls and I don't use maybe an 8-iron if I want to chip and run a ball and the situation suits it, or it's very windy, or especially at this time of year when it's very muddy and wet. I would say that a lob wedge possibly isn't the best club, not because it's the wrong club to use off those kind of lies, more that the ball will spin and grab a lot, and when greens are wet and soft or slow, you might want to play the same shot with the same method with maybe a sort of gap wedge or a wedge. He says selecting the wedge there you go, in case you don't know what a wedge looks like. And that will play a slightly lower shot, which will spin slightly less, and that means the ball won't suddenly grab when the greens are too soft. For all of my chipping, I'm going to use my most lofted club, and I suggest you do too. I'm going to talk about setup now. Now, I would argue that if you get your setup right, that is almost 80% of a chip shot done. I'm going to go through some of the things I see, what I want and what I don't want, and what I see a lot of. So there's some good player faults and there's some bad player faults. So we're going to go through those and see if we can eradicate those. I would say that you're going to be pretty much there with chipping. So following on from previous video, if you want to go back and like and share and follow and do all the stuff that would be helpful, that would be great. We said 101, we've got to hit down on the golf ball. It doesn't matter whether it's a 3-iron or my 58-degree wedge here. So with chipping, we need to hit down on the golf ball to make the ball spin upward. We don't want to hit upward. You can see if I'm going this way into the ball, I'm going to hit the ground in front of the ball. If I'm going this way, I'm hitting either the ground behind it or I'm hitting up on the ball. Well, that's going to create a top or a thin or an across the green or a fat where it goes nowhere, neither of those being good shots. So we want to try and avoid that. So the setup is key to stopping that happening. Right. Everything about our setup needs to produce one item, and that is the lowest point of that club or the club bottoming out in front target side of the golf ball. That is non-negotiable. That is exactly what must happen. So we have to set up in that way. Now we're going to talk through now how we do that. Firstly, I'm going to have my ball back level with my back big toe. So on my right foot, back big toe. Don't care, it could be either way around there, but it's got to be back of center. This is the big key that I see. This is where mistakes are made all the time. I now need my head and sternum, weight as well, over my front foot, over my front foot. So although I want my weight on my front foot, it's done by leaning forward. So if I grab this stick here, if I lean my weight forward this way, can you see how really my head and sternum are still back? If I lean my weight forward this way by moving my spine, so from my hips I stay and I lean my head and shoulder forward, can you see how that stick under my chin now is over my front foot? I can put my weight this way, but suddenly it's back. And that's what I see with good players all the time. I see good players go, I've moved my weight forward, but really like the stretch that we have in the gym, when we go there to stretch our sides, if I push my knees or my hips forward, immediately my head and sternum leans back to balance me. As soon as I'm this way, now the back or hitting behind the ball is in play again. If I stand there and I'm looking at the camera now and I lean my weight forward by using my head and my sternum and my spine, now can you see how suddenly my weight and my head and my chin is in front of the golf ball here, and you can almost immediately see that lowest point becomes in front of the ball, not behind the ball. Now, instinct's also in the favour of if you put a bunker or some rough or whatever in front of me, my brain says, oh, hang on, I've got to help it up in the air. But as we've established, we've got 50 to 60 degrees of loft here. We don't need to help it up in the air. That's just going to create that top thin and fat. So I have to still be this way. This will still create a huge amount of upward strike as you can see, or upward flight, because I'm hitting downward. So because my setup has my knee, my hip, and my sternum and my head in a sort of vertical line here, what that's going to naturally do when the ball is back by my back toe, as you can see here, it's going to let my hands hang in front of my left thigh. So when I put the club behind the ball now, my hands hang in front of the ball, and there's a nice forward lean, I think is the correct term, or there's a nice angle here. It's almost like I'm not giving a catch in cricket. My hands are naturally ahead of the ball. Now we're going to want to keep that at impact when we play the shot in a minute. So when I talk about the backswing and what we're going to do from there, we're trying to return basically to this point here. Now when I push the club there, you can see I'm pushing it here. My club won't move because it wants to go downward still, because I've set that downward arc in there, and we're going to use that again here. Two other things I just want to mention quickly while we're here is it's not putting, but it's not a full lob wedge. So I want to be in between. For me, it ends up being roughly a foot there that I want to send up. So I want to be a little bit nearer to it. We're going to talk a bit more about the line in a minute. And I also want to let my arms hang as much as humanly possible. So I literally want my arms to hang a little bit lower here. So you can see I'm nearer the bottom of the grip. I'm certainly not at the top trying to hit a full shot. So we're talking about backswing now. One of my real bugbears, one of the things that really gets me is when people tell me there should be no hinge. I read and see it, and people tell me it's more consistent if I don't use my wrists, if I stay really still, if I use a pendulum action here, it really helps my chipping. Now, we can all stand there and pendulum chip it, if that's what you want to call it, with no hinge. Yes, I agree. I can chip it. It makes no difference. But it's a limited shot. I can't hit it any further. So what happens if I need to hit it further here? Because I'm now stuck. What do I suddenly add it in? I don't use a hammer by using no hinge. I don't type by using no hinge. I don't throw a ball or a dart with no hinge. So I don't understand how being inconsistent by hinging the club in the backswing, or using our wrist hinge, wrist sent, wrist cock, whatever you want to call it, in the backswing is a bad thing. This allows me to hinge my wrist correctly, which allows the club now to have the speed that I need it to have coming into impact. The key with chipping, with throwing a ball, if we're going to keep those the same with throwing a dart, is that I need the length and speed of the ball at impact, or my hand, to be correct for the distance I want the ball to go. I don't do it by not hinging and helping it. I don't, by the same token, go too long and try and slow down. I want my natural speed to be right. So if I need it to be 10 miles an hour when I let go of it, I want it to be 10 miles an hour just before I let go of it. If I was throwing the ball as far as I can, I would want to accelerate through and past that shot. So my fastest point of the throw probably is past impact, and if I let go of it. But as I'm trying to throw at a different distance, I need to be able to control that speed pre and at impact. By having no hinge, that makes that very difficult here. You can see if I have no hinge, I'm now using a part of my body that's not designed for just a small throw or a bigger throw. So we want to make sure that we have hinge in our backswing. If we don't have hinge, it's taking away a lot of shots. As I say, it's great for one shot, 20 odd yards off a nice flat lie. But if I'm standing in the downslope in the rough, and I've got to kind of get the ball up in the air, having no hinge is going to catch all of the grass both ways. And also, if I need more distance, what do I do from that point? Okay, so we've talked about hinge in the backswing. I'm just going to talk from this side a little bit about line in the backswing. Now, for me, long game and putting work together. And what I mean by that is I'm quite happy if they're a little bit inside and then a little bit rotatey back, and we get a little bit of hook or draw or right to left spin as a right-handed person, that's fine. But in chipping, unless I'm choosing to do that, and there's the odd shot where you might want a little bit of run, I want to, if anything, feel that I'm slightly across the ball, if anything. So I would say that, not that I would ever call a backswing a straight line, but as you can see here, as I'm swinging that club back here, the club head is on a fairly neutral and quite straight line. My hands will move slightly inside, and as I swing through, my hands will move slightly inside left of me. But can you see here on the way through, can you see how that club face is still very neutral to where I'm going? So again, one of the things when I was a kid back in the 1950s, I used to work on, and I can remember doing it, is I used to try and keep my club face, what in my opinion or in my view, as neutral as I can here. So I never wanted the club face to open. I certainly didn't want the club face to close. And I wanted it, as I looked at it, it would go on a fairly neutral line here. So the club face is never changing. You can see it's almost a straight line. And if I was to work it that way and then back again, you can see how we're in quite a neutral, the club face hasn't really changed. Now, what I see a lot, again, tending to be good players because they're used to coming from the inside, I start seeing the club head getting too far behind the hands. Now, this is an absolute killer as far as I'm concerned. You can have a perfect setup, you can have a perfect ball position, but if you're going to swing that club too far behind you, now you've got to really get that club head to close. Now, we're going to tend to either use our body or we're going to start to use the hands, and you start to create that very shallow, flippy action. Now, as I say, there's the odd chip where that might work, but if you've got any kind of grass, any kind of dodgy lie, any kind of downward there, anything really shallow into the golf ball is going to be a killer. You can see I'd catch all that grass before there. That's not to say that I can't hit it like that, but that shouldn't be my stock and stable one. So if we're talking about bog standard 101, straightforward chips that I can use 95% of the time, I would want to see that club on a much straighter line back. You can see how if I carried on, it would be a much steeper position than probably some of you are getting into here. And we've talked a little bit about that in the swing as well. But if I can create that more neutral line here, it's going to create a much better impact position here, which we're now about to talk about next. So as we previously mentioned, we've got to hit the ground in front of the ball. So we're going to talk a little bit about impact now. In the backswing, as I've said, I want to have the club head going further than my hands. We're trying to keep it on a neutral line, but we're allowing the natural, if you want to call, what I would call natural weight of the club to shift further. So the club head goes further than my hands and arms, and that sets that club up into a nice kind of 90-degree angle here. Now, when I swing back down, as we said, I want the speed to be right at impact. Now, to create the speed right at impact, the length back, as we've said, needs to be correct. But I also need to deliver the club with my hands slightly, and I suppose my arms slightly ahead of the golf ball, so that I'm trapping the ball and then the ground, and then the club can carry on. Now, I'm a firm believer of I don't care what happens once I've hit the ball. I tend to be quite, in my short game, punchy. What I mean by that is I deliver a nice thud into the ball and I let the ball do the work, or the club head, sorry, do the work, therefore moving the ball. I am not, and never have been, a fan of short to long, because when I throw a ball, as we've established earlier, it doesn't matter if it's a short throw or a longer throw, I'm going to lengthen this to make the hand quicker at release point. I am not going to do the same length back and try and help it the other way. That is not natural, and that is therefore difficult to repeat. So I'm going to want the length back here to equal the distance I want, and I'm going to look or feel, I don't really do it now because I've learned it, but I'm going to look or feel at a point in front. That's where I feel the club is going to bottom out. I always think about it in the respect of if I were to put my phone here, and I'm not going to leave it there before the juniors get excited, I want to hit the mat somewhere where my phone is. If I'm brushing the ground somewhere where my phone is here, by definition, I will be hitting down, oops, move it across a bit, on that golf ball. And that's what we want. You can hear that thud. Now, one of the keys I think that I see a lot of, there's an instinct to help the ball up in the air. Now, you can see if I try and scoop it, number one, I'm not making a very long backswing. And number two, look at how my weight and my head want to lean back. I also want to use this right or left arm, and I break it down here into, we could call it chicken wing, but we break it into a wrist scoopy action. Now, for a normal basic 101 chip shot, I want to keep that left wrist firm. I want to keep the heel of my right hand leading. So as I hit it, that club face remains constant. I call it club face stability. Club face stability means that I'm going to get the same trajectory off the club every time I hit it. If I hit it harder or softer, it will be slightly higher or lower. But if I hit you 3 shots here, without overly thinking about it, if I played a small shot just off the mat, if I play one about 10 yards, if I play one about 30 yards, the ball has taken off the same way each time. The sound off the club is the same each time. I've lengthened and shortened my backswing, but the strike and the quality of the strike hasn't changed. If I change the loft at impact each time, then by definition, I'm changing the trajectory of the golf ball each time. Now, unless I want to do that, that's going to be another inconsistency. So I want to have exactly the same as best I can. Impact, if you like, dynamics, I think is a very good term for it. If I create the same position every single time I hit the golf ball, it doesn't matter whether it's longer or it's a very short shot, you can see that club face, the loft is the same every time. And that's going to give me a knowledge of trajectory. Therefore, I know, depending on the weather conditions, the green slope, the speed, and so on, we'll talk about this, on another day where we talk about different heights and shots and when we use them. We today are working on 101, creating the same impact position. We can see if I've got my sternum in the same place, if my wrists at impact are at the same place, if my length back and through changes, so all that happens is the speed that I remove, or sorry, not remove, but return the club to the ball at the same time changes, then I've hit a different shot, but with exactly the same characteristics. It should be the same looking shot, just landing a different distance. So hopefully this makes sense. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about different lies when we play chip shots, from good lies, bad lies, long rough, short rough, uphill, downhill, and so on. That we'll cover. But the basic 101 of what we've talked about today, creating that, should make sense. It doesn't matter what you're on, and it shouldn't matter how nervy you get, as long as you keep your weight forward. If I was to put the ball here, people go, but there, look, the mat, and then you're onto almost concrete astroturf. It shouldn't matter, because as long as I keep my head and sternum forward at address, as long as my weight's fully on my front foot, I can hit the same chip shot no matter what I do. So if you like that, if this has made sense to you, please like, follow, share, direct message me if you want more information or if you need more help with it. Keep your eyes peeled, because in the next few weeks we'll be following on and creating more information.